narcissism and sociopathology, both of those have roots that are in common vernacular, where people think someone is a sociopath, or people think somebody is a psychopath, or people think somebody is a narcissist, and it's kind of widespread. When in reality, all of those fall under a personality disorder that is quite rare. So there are percentages of the population that are likely to be narcissists. 2%-ish are expected to be narcissists, and 4%-ish are suspected to be sociopaths. But the difference between somebody who is fully baked, like somebody who's dealing with an antisocial personality disorder, ATPD, ASPD, the people who actually have those disorders are quite rare compared to the average person. Instead, what we're seeing are behavior traits that people adopt that become manipulative or become abusive. And those behavior traits can actually come from a lot of different backgrounds besides just antisocial personality disorder. For example, you might be a completely healthy neurotypical person who grew up in a household where your dad systematically verbally abused your mom. So now you're just conditioned to believe that that is normal. Just like we talked about how the brain creates shortcuts and cognitive biases. So it's very difficult to be able to actually identify a true narcissist or a true sociopath just by being around them. But it's much easier to identify the behaviors that are negatively impacting your life. And that's what I try to encourage people to do is don't get tied up trying to be a psychologist who is diagnosing these people in your lives. Instead, look for the behaviors that are not giving you a positive return on the investment in the relationship that you're engaged in. If you're in a relationship that's bringing you net benefit, then you might have a higher tolerance for somebody who is short-tempered with you, or somebody who's verbally abusive, or somebody who's emotionally inconsistent. But it's not worth it to be around people if you're not getting a significant benefit from it. And when you find yourself in that position where you're trying to help others, you're constantly sacrificing, you're constantly adjusting to try to please other people, that's a great indicator that you probably grew up in a household where you were conditioned to submit, acquiesce, or bend to the will of others to try to appease them. In the face of stress, CIA teaches us that there's 4 parasympathetic responses, 4 essential reactions that the human brain has. We all know 2 of them, fight or flight. In the face of high stress levels, you will have an instinctive response to either fight or run away. But there are 2 other instinctive responses that your brain is considering. One of them is called freezing. The other one, politely, is called fawning. We call them the 4 F's of parasympathetic response. In a more vulgar world, we talk about fight, flight, freeze, and but in a more appropriate scientific world, you hear them talk about fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fighting is obvious. It's when you fight whatever the stressor is. Flee is obvious. It's when you run away from whatever the stressor is. Freezing is relatively easy to understand. It's when you're so overwhelmed with stress, you don't take any action at all. And then fawning is the most difficult one to understand, but fawning is very common. When you're faced with stress, you submit to the dominant stress and you try to appease it in an effort to find some pathway of moving forward. It's the most easy to see in children. Some children argue back, some children run away, some children quietly find their way to a corner and sit there and play with their toys, and they live in a whole different world. But then there's that 4th child who becomes very sympathetic to their parent and wants to do whatever they can to help. And they start doing the dishes, or they start mopping the floors, they clean their room, or they're afraid to upset their parent, right? That child becomes an adult, and oftentimes those adults become people who are highly susceptible to the abusive tendencies of people who model behavior off of narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths.
So there are behaviors that we all could be looking out for in our everyday life to avoid that person and having them as a close friend, a business partner, a lover, whatever it might be. Are there things that we should be looking out for? You know, you said stay away from the diagnosis side, but are there behaviors you want people to be aware of that could be an indication that somebody might have had so much trauma that they're going to take out their trauma on you eventually.
Yeah, without a doubt. One of the biggest telltale signs that you're looking for is the person who always claims to be the victim. If you're dealing with somebody who never gets the opportunity at work and nobody understands and they believe they're smart and they never get to show how smart they are, that person has a warped sense of reality. They essentially live in their own point of view, their own perception of the world, rather than a larger, accurate, more objective perspective of the world. And when somebody sees themselves as the victim, the person they feel the most comfortable with is the person they're explaining their victimization to, which would be you in this case, right? So if someone feels so comfortable that they're telling you that they're the victim, that's generally a red flag that when they want to vent their frustration, they will vent it at you because they do not see you as a threat. You also want to stay away from people who are constantly trying to claim that they have more capability than they really have. And we've seen this in our friends at times, right? You got the guy friend who says that he's really good with women, but then he actually chickens out whenever he walks into a bar. You got the person who says that they're really fit, but you can see that they carry a few extra pounds. Like we've all seen examples of this, but when it's carried to an extended, a more active space where they believe that they're really, really smart, they believe that they're really organized, they believe that they're, they can make money more than they actually can. They have higher confidence than they really do. That's an example of something we call the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is when somebody overstates their confidence. Generally, when somebody's overstating their confidence like that, again, they're showing you that they believe very highly of themselves, which is another way of them saying that they don't believe very highly of you, or else they wouldn't be telling you how great they are. If they actually thought you were a competitor, they wouldn't be giving you their qualifications. Instead, they would see you as a potential threat. Again, just like with the first example, this is the kind of person that when they turn, they are likely to turn on you. So you're looking for the signs of Dunning-Kruger in your friends, in your lovers, in your spouses, in your coworkers. You're also looking for those people who are constantly being victimized. What you're looking for to be healthy, to be safe, you're looking for somebody who's balanced. You're looking for somebody who has a wide empathetic response to the world around them. Some days they're happy, some days they're sad, some days they're confident, some days they're a little bit self-conscious. When you find that person who's constantly going back and forth through empathetic highs and lows, that is much more common of a neurotypical person than somebody who's generally very confident or someone who's consistently victimized.
I want to talk about health a little bit. You've been on a few different podcasts talking about how important it was when you were at the CIA and regularly going on missions to keep your body and your mind and your spirit performing well. Tell us and our audience some of the things that you've kept up or maybe even doubled down on since having left and now working on your business, Everyday Spy. What are some of the health routines that are crucial to you being secure in the way that you were describing to us earlier?
Yeah, and one of my most important routines is my morning routine. Not just because it's how I start the day, but because it's also a rhythm that helps me kind of jumpstart all of the actions that are going to happen throughout the day. So for my mornings, I always start my mornings with water. It's the first thing I consume, 500 milliliters of water. I do that for biological reasons. It hydrates the system. It immediately is absorbed through the upper intestine and through the stomach. It resolves things like dry mouth and swollen orifices in the mouth. So water is extremely beneficial. Immediately after following my 500 milliliters of water, I also go into something that I call getting quiet, which many people call meditation, some people call reflection or mindfulness. But what CIA taught us to do is that when you are in that meditative state, what we call getting quiet, you are reducing sensory inputs from all around you. And you have 5 senses. So to remove yourself from sensory inputs means you have to remove yourself from all 5 senses. Find a quiet place, yes, but also find a dark place that doesn't have too many lights. Find a place with a neutral smell. Make sure that you don't have anything on your palate that's particularly tasty or otherwise. And then, of course, you want to be in a place where you don't have a lot of sensory skin-based inputs. So you don't want to be cold, you don't want to be hot, you don't want to be carrying something heavy, you don't want to be wearing heavy clothes, you don't want to be wearing fuzzy slippers. because all of those sensory inputs are what go into your brain and pull on mental resources. So essentially, if you can wake up and sit on what I do is I wake up, my water's sitting next to my bed. I drink it relatively quickly. I wouldn't call it pounding it, but I do drink it relatively quickly. And then right there, I'll just sit on the edge of my bed and I'll take my between 2 and 5 minutes to just be quiet. All that's on my tongue is water. The light is still low in the room. Everybody else is still sleeping. It's still quiet. I haven't eaten anything. There's no strong smells in my neutral room that I haven't been smelling all night anyways, right? And I'm wearing the same pajamas I've been wearing to bed. So it's a great opportunity to reduce the amount of sensations, sensory inputs, and just give your brain an opportunity to do what we call indexing. When you sleep, your brain is actually quite active. And it's in that moment that you wake up that you have an opportunity to index your unconscious thoughts over the course of the night with the conscious thoughts that you're about to have throughout the day. And that indexing period of time is incredibly valuable for innovation, for creative thinking, for memory retention, and for other cognitive benefits. So that morning routine of drinking water, meditating, and then actually after that is when I have my first bit of consumption. And what I'll eat is some sort of natural whole food source that is high in fiber and also high in natural sugars. Strawberries, apples, berries, peaches, that kind of thing. Because again, it's both biologically and cognitively beneficial. It gives me energy in the form of simple sugars, but it also brings fiber into my system, which I need to jumpstart my system for the rest of the day. So that morning routine is critical to me, and it's something that I don't vary on. In addition to that, I also have aerobic exercise. I don't ever bypass aerobic exercise. I'll do that a minimum of 4 times a week because blood flow leads to physical healing as well as cognitive retention. So the actual process of just having blood circulate through your system is exceptionally beneficial, and you only get that when you have a strong heart rate, and heart rate is easiest to maximize during cardiovascular fitness. And then the other thing I'll say is I really do stay away from processed foods because the body just does better with true macronutrients rather than processed ingredients that it has a harder time breaking down. Those were all things that were taught to me at CIA. They were all tools that were given to us because there's a practical element too. You just can't find the same processed foods in the Middle East that you find in Latin America. And you can't find your way to the same kind of coffee in the United States as you have in Europe. So water can be filtered and be the same pretty much everywhere. Aerobic exercise is the same anywhere. Whole food sources based on macronutrients are the same everywhere.
Andrew, as we're winding down today, and thank you again for your time, super appreciate it. I want to come back to the original question I was asking you. And I mentioned that your mission is to help people break barriers in their life. Can you just chat about that a little bit and how you're doing that now that you've left CIA?
Yeah, when I was at CIA, I don't know about most people. I was at like the peak of my self-confidence. When you get recruited and invited to CIA, what runs through your head is this idea of like spy movies and spy books, and you must be as special as your mom always said you were, because here you are at CIA, right? So your ego is inflated and you start to believe that you're something special. Well, then I get to CIA and I'm surrounded by hundreds of other people who are having the same high that I'm having. And then we collectively have our bubble burst. Because being at CIA is an incredibly humbling thing. It's very challenging, it's very difficult. There's always somebody faster, stronger, smarter, a better shot, somebody with a better memory. It's just, you realize very quickly that you are not the best of the best of the best. Then CIA took me and put me through my formal training process. About 4 days into the farm, our formal training process, what's known as Field Tradecraft Course or FTC, I had a mental breakthrough where they kind of taught me what it was about me that made me think I was so special when I was recruited. And it was the first time that you hear people talk about an out-of-body moment when they die, where they can kind of float above their sick or weakened self and they look down and they see themselves for who they really are. It was kind of a mental out-of-body moment where I realized like, oh my gosh, I've been arrogant and conceited, and I've been, all these flaws my whole life. But I also saw the strengths that I've had that I never realized were strengths. And it's all because of the systematic training process that CIA put all of us through. Because in that same week, everybody to my left and right was having those breakthroughs too. And that was kind of when I first realized that CIA is an optimization organization. It's there to take normal people, break a mental barrier that they have, and then turn them into optimal field collection operators. And that's where my life went from there. I've never forgotten the memory of that day where my whole point of view was cracked and shattered and a whole new point of view was built. And when I left CIA, my wife is also former CIA, we met at the agency together. When we left together in 2014 and we rejoined the everyday world, there was always a gap between us and everybody we met. It didn't matter whether they were a supervisor or a business owner or, a teacher. It didn't matter who they were. There was always this gap where we had had this breakthrough and they had not. And that's what inspired us to start Everyday Spy, because CIA had taught us how to break barriers within ourselves using a systematic training process. Well, we knew the same systematic training process because we brought it out of CIA. There's nothing classified or secret about how CIA trains. It's only classified what they do day to day for their operational purposes, right? So Everyday Spy is essentially our way of bringing that systematic training process to everyday people. How they trained us mentally, how they trained us behaviorally, how they trained us physically, how they trained us analytically. And we teach that for corporations, for individuals. We even teach it to governments in the United States and abroad because it's so transformative. CIA was able to do it for us in a matter of days. So we can literally transform the way people think, the way they think of themselves, the way they think of health, the relationships they have with brothers and sisters and spouses and business partners. We can have huge impact in a very short period of time because we're using a proven systematic process. And that mission just hit me like a ton of bricks when we left CIA and we couldn't rebuild the kinds of relationships that we had with our brothers and sisters who were operators on the inside. So there was a selfish piece where I wanted to be with people who were optimized. But then there was also a pragmatic piece where I was like, if I want friends, I have to build friends. I have to help people understand a little bit of what CIA gave me. And it's just turned into this incredible business, a very successful podcast, a very successful network, and it continues to grow every year.